summit on, President Trump leaves open the possibility of bailing on a meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Pastor in prison. We talk with a U.S. senator who just visited a Christian serving a jail sentence in Turkey. Communion controversy. The Vatican reportedly rules against a proposal by the German bishops. And it's in her blood. A 95-year-old Catholic woman is honored for her generosity. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, April 19th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump says he's looking forward to a meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, but he may still pull the plug on the historic summit. Correspondent Mark Irons just returned to the White House from the president's Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. I was there when Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's delegation left West Palm Beach International Airport this morning. He and President Trump spent the last 2 days at Mar-a-Lago discussing key issues like North Korea. President Trump is hopeful about his encounter with its leader, but he still reserves the right to back out.
If I think that it's a meeting that is not going to be fruitful, we're not going to go. If the meeting, when I'm there, is not fruitful, I will respectfully leave the meeting.
President Trump says he wants to remain flexible as he prepares for the first ever summit between the U.S. and North Korea in more than 6 decades.
북남 관계에서 달라진 것이란 아무것도 없습니다.
The president hopes to terminate Kim Jong-un's ability to use nuclear weapons and bring 3 Americans detained in North Korea back home.
The fact is that they do have 3 prisoners. We have been talking about them. We're negotiating now. We are doing our very best.
Trump also promised Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe he would work to secure the return of Japanese citizens abducted by North Korea.
We will work very hard on that issue.
Menti delle armi nucleari.
Pope Francis has called for world leaders to rid the planet of nuclear weapons. The U.S. did not sign a 2017 United Nations treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, but last night the president expressed a lofty goal.
We have to end nuclear weapons, ideally in all parts of the world.
The anti-nuclear weapons group that won last year's Nobel Peace Prize says it's very supportive of a summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Lauren?
Mark, the million-dollar question is, where will this summit take place? What do you know?
I spoke to one White House official with knowledge of the matter who is staying very tight-lipped about what sites are under consideration. But we do know the president has said 5 locations are being looked at.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. A Senate committee is set to vote on Monday on the nomination of CIA Director Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. But Democrats tonight are pushing back.
Mr. Pompeo has a history of talking about regime change, of seeking military options versus diplomatic ones. Well, maybe that's a good characteristic for being the Secretary of Defense, but it's not to be the Secretary of State, for which diplomacy is the first line, and I think one of the most important line of defense for the country.
Pompeo is expected to have enough votes in the Senate to win confirmation. Joining me now is Representative Mike Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin. Congressman Gallagher also serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the Homeland Security Committee. Congressman Gallagher, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back.
We learned earlier this week that CIA Director Mike Pompeo secretly met with North Korea's President Kim Jong-un over Easter weekend. Of all of the Trump administration officials who could have made that visit, why was it Pompeo when he hadn't been confirmed yet for Secretary of State?
Well, I think he was acting in his capacity as director of the CIA, particularly when it deals with North Korea, for whom normal diplomatic relations are stunted at best. Our intel agencies traditionally would take the lead on something like this, and certainly in preparation for something as important as a meeting between Kim Jong-un and the President of the United States, you would want some officials laying the groundwork and also assessing whether the North Koreans are serious about denuclearization. And we've seen time again in the past that they haven't been serious. They've continued their program. And so I do think it was appropriate for Mike Pompeo to at least test the hypothesis as to how serious they are and also help the president prepare for what will be a very critical meeting.
You know, the president came out just today or yesterday, I believe, saying that he will pull out of this deal if he thinks that it's not going to be fruitful. In your opinion, as someone who has been in military circles for a very long time, is this deal, is this meeting going to happen?
I think the meeting will happen, but I also think the president has the right approach. You have to be willing to pull out if you don't think the North Koreans are serious. In fact, I think that's where we went wrong with our negotiation with the Iranians. It became clear very quickly that the previous administration was so desperate for a deal that they weren't willing to walk away, and therefore we got a deal that was not in our national interest. And we have to remind ourselves that the North Koreans are the ones who are in violation of every international norm and law. It is their program that is threatening us. They're the ones who have to denuclearize, and we can't let what has happened in the past happen again. In the past, we've seen them promise denuclearization in the distant future in return for sanctions relief in the present, and that hasn't worked out well. So I think you have to be willing to walk away if you find out they're not serious.
We're hearing reports that North Korea is no longer demanding that American troops be removed from South Korea as a condition for denuclearization. This seems like a positive sign, no?
We'll see. And I'll admit that I'm very skeptical as to how serious the North Koreans are. Again, time and time again, they've promised the world and then violated every agreement we've had with them. That's why I think it's so important that while we're testing this diplomatic path, we have to continue to apply maximum pressure economically. We have to continue to apply pressure on the Chinese as well. And we have to make sure that the Chinese don't insert themselves into this negotiation in an attempt to get us to remove our military presence on the Korean Peninsula.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, Republican from Wisconsin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It is still not clear when UN inspectors will be able to visit the site of a suspected chemical weapons attack in Syria. It's been 12 days since the U.S. says the Syrian government gassed its own citizens. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the Pentagon. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Defense Secretary James Mattis says he's concerned UN weapons inspectors have not been allowed into Douma, the area where 40 people died. But the Pentagon has another concern. The campaign of misinformation they say is spearheaded by the Russians. During today's press briefing, Pentagon spokesperson Dana White disputed a Russian claim that Syria shot down a number of Allied missiles on Friday night. She says none of the more than 100 American, French, or British missiles were shot down. White and General Kenneth McKenzie also say there were no reports of any civilian casualties. The general says he's confident the strikes were successful.
We assess that the weapons hit the target. We achieved the level of success that we wanted against those three targets. We believe that there was probably some chlorine and possibly sarin at possibly all of the sites. As you know, we don't have access to that site, so it's hard to go in and do that post-strike analysis except from a distance and with overhead imagery. So that's probably going to be an open question for a little bit of time.
Syria denies the claim that their government forces are responsible for the reported chemical attack. Russia, who backed Syria, says the alleged gas attack was staged by Britain. Russia blames rebels who are fighting the Syrian government. Officials at the United Nations are not saying when they will try to send their inspectors back in. They tried to enter the site yesterday, but had to leave after they were shot at. Lauren?
Right. Any update on American sanctions against Russia? On Sunday, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley had indicated sanctions were coming.
Well, Lauren, several reports indicate that the president is the one who actually dialed back on any plans to impose new sanctions on Russia. Senior officials say President Trump informed the Russian government of his decision on Sunday, but it's still possible more sanctions could be considered in the future. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the Pentagon. Thank you, Wyatt. A Catholic priest just north of Mexico City is murdered in his office. A Vatican news agency says it happened yesterday just before Father Ruben Diaz was set to celebrate evening mass. Police say the 50-year-old had been arguing with a man in his office before his death. A new political era in Cuba as the National Assembly selects a president. Miguel Diaz-Canel succeeds Raul Castro, whose family has led the communist nation for 6 decades. The symbolic change comes amid economic stagnation and increasing disenchantment among younger generations. Cuba is 85% Catholic. The government is officially atheist. An island-wide blackout in Puerto Rico for the first time since Hurricane Maria. Officials say a transmission line was accidentally knocked down. It could take 24 to 36 hours to restore power to more than 1.4 million people. A Christian church in Pakistan is burned a half hour before a Sunday service. A Vatican news agency says the attack destroyed the building's interior. No arrests have been made. The country's Catholic bishops earlier this week took part in a demonstration to protest the attack. Around 100 miles away, the country's first Christian chapel opens at an Islamic university. Asia News reports the Church of St. Mary was dedicated earlier this week. The area's Roman Catholic bishop says it, quote, offers a message of love and harmony. Crackdown in central China. Catholics are being told not to bring children to Mass, and crosses are removed from churches. UCA News, a Catholic news source in Asia, reports it is part of a recent clampdown on religious freedom. The government cites Article 36 of their constitution and says it will close churches that disobey. The Pope's chief of doctrine has reportedly rejected a controversial proposal by some German bishops. The plan would have allowed Protestant spouses of Catholics to receive communion under specific circumstances. An Australian Catholic news site reports the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, with the approval of Pope Francis, has written a letter to the bishops. But the Holy Father does not want that letter to be made public, according to the National Catholic Register, our news partner. Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliette, give us more details on this original proposal and what it would have entailed.
Well, in February, a majority of Germany's bishops agreed on a proposal to produce a pastoral handout providing guidelines that would have allowed Protestants who are married to Catholics to receive the Eucharist under the following conditions. So that together with a priest, they've examined their consciences, that they long to satisfy a hunger for the Eucharist, that they declare fidelity to the Catholic Church, and that they wish to end so-called spiritual distress. Now, Archbishop Luis Ladaria, the Pope's head of doctrine, has reportedly rebuffed this extremely controversial proposal, Lauren.
We covered this topic on News Nightly last month when a small group of prominent German bishops wrote a letter protesting the proposal. Is this a victory for them? What were their concerns about it?
Well, indeed, Cardinal Rainer Wolke of the German city of Cologne led a group of 7 bishops in writing to Ladaria, saying the proposal went far beyond the competence of the Conference of Germany's bishops and that it undermined the unity of the Church, and also that it flew in the face of Catholic doctrine. So that was just a few weeks ago, and now sources are confirming to Edward Penton, our colleague at the National Catholic Register, that the Holy Father rejects the proposal, but doesn't want his disapproval to be made public.
I wonder why that is. That's interesting. Has the Vatican or the German bishops confirmed the story or issued a response, public response?
Well, there has not been any form of an official Vatican response, while the German bishops, they've denied the story but said that it is a work in progress. In other words, a draft subject to revision. So, Lauren, this is very much a developing story that we here at News Nightly will be following closely for you from the Vatican.
Thank you so much, Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Pope Francis tells the faithful to get up and go and evangelize.
Queste 3 parole sono chiavi per tutti noi cristiani che dobbiamo evangelizzare.
At his daily Mass at the Vatican, Francis says evangelizing must be done one-on-one, and the Holy Spirit will direct us. He adds, go until you feel your work has been accomplished. Coming up, our one-on-one with an Episcopalian pastor who has preached to President Trump. And happy anniversary, Pope Benedict. U.S. senators threaten sanctions if Turkey doesn't free an imprisoned American pastor. More than 500,000 people have signed an online petition demanding his freedom. Jason Calvi talked to the pastor's senator who attended the first day of the trial in Turkey. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Turkey charges Andrew Brunson with spying and having links with groups it says were behind the country's failed 2016 coup. Now, the North Carolina native told the court Monday he's innocent. His Senator, Republican Tom Tillis, was in the courtroom, and I spoke to him about it earlier today.
I thought it was a kangaroo court. I mean, it bears no resemblance to our criminal justice system. The judges made a decision to keep him in prison on the Friday before the hearing. Before they heard a first word of testimony from Pastor Brunson, they'd already decided that they were going to keep him incarcerated. All but one witness was a so-called secret witness that testified through a video. Those witnesses, we know the identities, or we believe we know the identities of a few of them. We think they're completely not credible. And what I saw was really, in my opinion, a miscarriage of justice.
The president said that this was persecution. Is this because he's a Christian? Is that why he's facing this?
If you read the indictment, there are several references to the fact that suggest that because he was a missionary and because he was bringing the gospel to people, that somehow that's a terrorist act.
The pastor served the country for 23 years. He's 50 years old. He'll be in prison probably for the rest of his life if he's convicted. You visited him in prison. How is he doing?
I think that he's doing as well as he can under the circumstances. He's lost 50 pounds. His mental state, he's trying to hang on, trying to be optimistic, but I mean, he's been put under terrible conditions. He's confined 24 hours a day in a cell. For over a year, he was in a cell that was designed for 8 people, that had 21 people in it. He was the only American in that cell. In spite of all that, he and Ms. Brunson are really showing a lot of courage, but any of us subjected to those conditions for 19 months would find it very, very difficult, and I admire him for his strength.
Did he talk at all about his faith when you visited with him?
Well, he did. And, you know, he also said that this is a time when he's being challenged, and he hopes to grow from it. But every time you think you're making progress, the court system there, the criminal justice system there seems to be failing him. So we've got to be there to lift him up. That's why I've been there twice over the last month.
What is Congress going to do if Turkey doesn't free the pastor?
Well, there's any number of options. I mean, Turkey is a NATO ally. We have an Air Force base there now. They're a very important part of our supply chain for the Joint Strike Fighter. A lot of parts get manufactured there for the F-35. We've got to take a look at our relationship and try and send the message to Turkey. We want them to be one of our strongest allies. This is not how you treat an ally, a citizen of an allied nation. And we're going to do everything that we can through the National Defense Authorization Act, through the Foreign Affairs Committee, to send a very clear message that this is wrong, and we intend to right it.
And many of his colleagues agree with Senator Tillis. 78 lawmakers of both parties last year urged Turkey's president to release Brunson. President Trump and Vice President Pence are both pushing for his release. The pastor's American lawyer tells me Brunson is not doing well and needs prayers. Lauren, the trial continues May 7th.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you for keeping us updated on that important story. Thank you. Senator Tammy Duckworth and her daughter made Senate history today.
Ms. Duckworth, no.
The Illinois Democrat arrived to vote on the Senate floor this afternoon with her newborn, Miley. Duckworth and colleagues unanimously passed a rule last night to allow children under 1 year of age on the floor. Duckworth is the only senator to have given birth while serving in the Senate. A blow for pro-lifers in Ohio. A federal appeals court says Planned Parenthood can continue to receive $1.4 million from the state health department. Pro-life lawmakers passed a law barring the funds from going to the nation's largest abortion provider. It was signed in 2016 by Republican Governor John Kasich. Planned Parenthood said the law violated its constitutional rights. Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, Kansas Representative Ron Estes calls for new rules in a family planning grant to stop tax dollars from going to Planned Parenthood.
And if you go back and look between 2013 and 2016, Planned Parenthood raised over $170 million through this Title X funding. And if we can cut that off, making sure that those dollars are used for real health care as opposed to abortions.
You can see more of host Catherine Hadrow's interview tonight on Pro-Life Weekly at 10 p.m. Eastern on EWTN. Visit EWTN.com for other times. Up next, today marks 13 years since the election of Pope Benedict. And a grandmother and her needlework. A 95-year-old Canadian woman is given an award for several decades of service. On this day in 2005, Cardinals elected Joseph Ratzinger as the new head of the Catholic Church. He took the name Benedict XVI and was Pope until 2013. He just celebrated his 91st birthday on Monday. The Archdiocese of Santa Fe is asking for prayers for the Catholic woman killed this week on a Southwest Airlines jet. 43-year-old Jennifer Reardon was a parishioner at Our Lady of the Annunciation Parish, where her 2 children attended school. Reardon also was a member of the state's Catholic Foundation. The Archdiocese says in a statement, "We pray for the repose of her soul and for her dear loved ones." President Trump draws a crowd wherever he goes, including church. That's what the rector of Bethesda by the Sea, the Episcopalian church near Mar-a-Lago, tells us. Reverend Harlan says he does not change his sermons if he knows the president will be there, saying, "I try to preach to everyone."
Well, I would say it's a gift to have anyone in church who comes to church. The Trump's coming here certainly has drawn a lot of people into our parish for worship and for programs and simply just to visit, and we're glad to have everyone in church, so that's a real gift.
This year, the Trumps attended Easter and Christmas services there, and they were married there in 2005. Reverend Harlan drew attention when his Christmas sermon was about the power of words. But again, he says it was not intended for the president, saying all of us use words in harmful and hurtful ways. Please visit EWTN News Nightly Facebook page to see the complete interview. Finally, tonight, a 95-year-old Canadian Catholic grandmother is given an award for her generosity. And I don't know if I could have done this. You guys tell me if you could. Beatrice Janik is the country's oldest blood donor. The Vancouver Sun said she began in the 1940s after her husband was involved in an accident. Yesterday, the Canadian Blood Services honored her. She was accompanied by her 3 sons. In her spare time, and I love this, she makes rosaries. Beatrice tells the paper she can't complain about a darn thing. Now, how many of us can say that, really? For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.